Hi there. In this lecture we see an amazing clash between Vassily Ivanchuk and Garry Kasparov in 1991 Linares tournament round 1. So e4 from Ivanchuk, Kasparov plays the Sicilian defense, knight f3, d6, and then we have the Moscow variation. This is bishop b5 check. We have knight d7. Bishop d7 is also a popular move here. For example, white could take, get rid of the light square bishops. Basically it allows a Maroczy bind without a piece which isn't harmonious. But white is not obliged to play it like a Maroczy bind. White could actually play, instead of c4, white could actually consider c3. This is another way of playing it, just a bit like a Roy Lopez in a way, with an even position. So knight d7 though was played, d4, knight gf6, white castles, c takes d4, queen takes d4, a6, and now Ivanchuk gives up the light square bishop. Bishop takes d7, bishop g5, and now h6 is played here. Maybe e6 is slightly safer. For example, c4, the dreaded Maroczy bind, but black can live with this position. For example, here with h6, the bishop dropping back, there's opportunities for black to try and use the e5 point as an example with an even position. In the game, this is quite provocative. Black is hoping for bishop h4, but Ivanchuk didn't do this. In the event of bishop h4, g5 is good. Black can think out of the bishop and get a pretty exciting position, taking out that bishop on g3. And we reach a position, for example, like this, where black is doing very well indeed, with great attacking prospects. But Ivanchuk sidestepped all of that. After h6, he simply gave up the other bishop. So we have this kind of debate here, the two knights versus the two bishops. Which is stronger? And when I first covered this game many years back on YouTube, I talked about how Ivanchuk's trying to kind of squish these bishops. So you can see this kind of squishing and squashing process in action now. c4, e6, knight c3, rook c8. We have king h1. So this prepares in advance for any g-file attack that white has a resort rook g1 if needed later. Quite deep prophylaxis. h5, a4, and with this move it gives the idea that white might be intending to blunt this bishop, to blunt it, and also have enough support for c4 at the same time. h4 is played. If a5, b3, in fact, this position, we can see that white could get a very comfortable position by targeting essentially the d6 pawn with some nifty maneuvers here, like this rook a2 to d2. If we reach this position with a knight coming to b5, this is highly problematic, that d6 pawn. So f4 is nifty to support g2, and white could end up crashing through on the d file without penalty. The queen is looking at g1, so there's no cheapo, there's no mate on g1 or anything. That's just winning. So anyway, h4 is played, h3, bishop e7, b4, and now a5. If black castles, just to illustrate this, it looks a bit unsafe intuitively, but here's just an example of what could happen. The knight could come over, and say f5, black trying to play energetically. This could happen with knight d5, now threatening knight takes e7, forking king and queen. This is just a fictional scenario. And here, there's even queen h6. The king's so exposed that e takes, there's rook g1, which is now an attacking move to the king on g8, not defending, but attacking. And this is just absolutely crushing stuff. So fascinating stuff there. So anyway, a5 was played, b5, and you can see the bishops are starting to be squished. The d7 bishop in particular doesn't look too harmonious, to say the least. B takes would have given some counterplay. It's really good intuitive play, this game, because we really don't want to give the opponent active pieces and possibilities. So even if this is theoretically an advantage for white, black's getting a lot of play here. For example, this looks scary. This is just a fictional example. It all looks a bit scary, but white's better, but sure. But this way is just containing black's position, containing the bishops, And this is the kind of neural network approach when we see in modern engines, neural networks trying to destroy the opponent's bishops, blunt them, lock them in to their own pawn chain as much as possible, a hermetic seal, so to speak, to make sure there's zero counterplay. So this b5 is kind of trying to reduce black's counterplay all the time. So queen c7, okay, knight d2. Black does have the c5 square to play with, queen d3, rook g8, rook a e1, queen g5, okay, threatening checkmate, that's parried, queen f4, okay, hitting the pawn potentially, that could be useful, that's parried, b6, as though there's a locking key on the c5 square. If rook g7, as an example, knight e2 here, white could play f4 and f5, and in fact this position white could actually make progress despite black having the bishop pair. If we take this scenario as an example, it's funny, this kind of example situation, there's e5, which does a lot of damage to black's position. For example, queen takes knight e4, and here with knight f4 the knights are really quite vicious creatures all of a sudden. So for example, bishop c5, yeah, because d6 is very vulnerable, white could just smash through like this with queen e4, lots of possibilities here. And here for example, queen takes b7 and c5 here. This is way off, but this is just as an example to show how white can really just crash through that d file. So I know that was way off. I just wanted to understand the position myself on this iconic game a little bit more. If f takes f6 check, that's easy to understand. And if so d takes, yes, knight e4, queen c7, knight takes f6 is good. For example, this position is pretty devastating. The quiet move knight c3 is simple and strong here actually, before even queen f5 check. So here for example, queen f5 check, knight d5 check, and here queen h5 is super strong. So the queen's attacked as well. If queen d6, rook takes f7 check, and this is crashing through. If rook takes, that is actually mate. So we can see, yeah, these wonderful scenarios where these knights are pretty vicious, and this position, knight f6 check, is winning the queen. So yeah, absolutely strange, weird and wonderful scenarios are resulting here. So b6 was played. We have knight e2, queen h6, and now, yeah, a funny move, just as funny as e5 actually, in a way. Guess what white plays here? So a fascinating position, because the intuition, one's intuition generally, we don't want to generally open up things if the opponent has the bishop pair, but in this particular situation, and look at the aesthetics, the knights over on these two squares and the bishops on these two squares. The aesthetics of this position is also remarkable. And white's rooks huddled, black's rooks apart. Yes, so white plays c5 here. It's a fascinating move indeed, whatever black does. I mean, there's three ways of capturing this. We have rook takes c5. If b takes, the problem is, one of the problems, knight c4 is a juicy move in many respects. So for example, taking out d6, and white has that protected passed pawn now, that b pawn is a protected passed pawn. And for example, this situation is going to be fairly pleasant for white. So for example here, white can gang up on a5, two connected passed pawns, progress is being made. So that is absolutely fascinating on b takes. On d takes, again, knight c4 and f4, this example, f5, shows how the knights are really causing a lot of problems. So knight takes, looking at d7. You know, otherwise, yeah, I mean, what is black doing? Is black's in big trouble. F takes, and then knight d6, and then there's always e5 now, because that nasty pin on the f6 pawn. So yes, there's a massive impact of this c5 in all of these three moves. Kasparov chooses rook takes c5, so we have knight c4, king f8. If d5, then knight takes b6. In this position, white can pile up on d5, and pile up, and then take on d5 with a knight. Actually, this is devastating. With the king on d8, this is going to be big amount of pain for black. So for example here, black starting to crumble. So yes, it's absolutely fascinating stuff. If d takes e4, we're just taking on d7, of course. Relatively speaking, that's easy to understand. So king f8 was tried. Knight takes b6. So we've got a protected passed pawn now. Ivanchuk has a protected passed pawn. Bishop e8. The bishops are very huddled here. If bishop c8, we're just going to take on c8 and play b6. And in this scenario, that passed b pawn is a wonderful asset to try and use. For example, like this. And then actually we have resources like this. So we're looking at the queen over there. This is just much better for white. So okay, bishop e8, f4, f5, and now e takes is played. Rook takes is the response. If e takes here, then white has that d5 square, knight d5, and the knights are just superior here. White can afford this position quite easily, and this transition to an endgame with that protected passed pawn is going to be great for white. For example, this situation, black's shedding material. If we look at this again, you might ask, well, why c4? If f5 we're just taking that, what is black actually doing here? If bishop f7 we're playing b6, and if the king ever moves, we've got knight f5 check, and we haven't even, this is even stronger than taking on e7. This is crushing. So yeah, it's funny stuff. So rook takes is tried, rook c1, and this invasion to the 7th is nasty. g4, this is a very squishy move on this side of the board now, which was thought to be, you might have thought, well, that's just holding the fort. But actually, rook c5 is played. If h takes, the problem is queen takes g3 check. And yes, this is scooping up g8 checkmate. And here, bishop g5 is just hopeless. We're just taking that. And knight d4 is hopeless. So, okay, so rook c5 was played. Rook takes c5, and now it's like Kasparov is beaten into a corner. Starting with knight c8, all the pieces are being huddled into a limited number of squares. I have not really seen this in too many games of Garry Kasparov. He's actually really kind of cornered in this game. All of his pieces are cornered. f5, squishing even more. This is a real squish. So queen h6 is played. If e takes, g takes is winning the queen. I mean, who would have thought this could happen to Kasparov? It's brutal. It's really brutal. Queen h6. We have g5, queen h5. Okay, a threat. It's extinguished. Rook g2 was also sufficient. What is black doing? c4. We're just taking on e8. This isn't much counterplay. f6 check. And then g6. And then white can just get to a winning endgame. It's all pretty crushing by this stage. We have rook g4 though. E takes, and now knight f4. There's a lot of square vacation moves for these knights, so that hits the queen, and the ridiculous queen h8. We have one of the most ridiculous positions you'll ever see of Garry Kasparov in this entire course, or in general. This is just totally ridiculous. The thing is, queen h7, can you spot what white plays here? Yeah, queen f6 check. This is checkmate. So queen h8, Kasparov game full off to carry on. Queen f6 check. King h7, rook takes h4, and now Kasparov resigns. Not a moment too soon. Bishop h6, there's rook or queen takes. Queen takes is stronger, or is it? They're both checkmate, actually. No, it's just an amazing game. It's Kasparov is usually the winner in this course. He's usually crushing people. It's very rare. This is one of Ivanchuk's classic games. So Ivanchuk is in planet Ivanchuk, they say. He's sometimes preoccupied with other thoughts. There's some hilarious clips of Ivanchuk collecting prizes at tournaments, like playing drafts as well. He's playing like checkers or drafts, and he's an expert at that as well. He's an amazing intellect, Ivanchuk. A very peculiar kind of playing style, very unique, and he's not afraid, as this game shows, to take the opening off the beaten path and kind of rule violate. You know what? The thing is, if you study Lasker in particular, in my view, Lasker shows the transformation of advantages can be a weird and wonderful experience. Sometimes You are giving the opponent things because you know that your pieces are going to be able to better exploit certain other types of advantage. So being flexible in what you give the opponent, even if you give the opponent a bishop pair, that flexibility, it shows here with the resourceful pawn breaks in particular that the knights are having a field day in this game and the bishops are being squished. So this was I just feel this is a squishing game, an epic squishing game, showing the perils sometimes of having the bishop pair under the wrong circumstances. So a really amazing game to study, absolutely fascinating variations. And black was really, bottled up, limited in counterplay. This is exactly how modern neural networks beat their sort of more analytical counterparts, which haven't been neural networked yet. You have to kind of create a hermetic seal to counterplay, make sure there's no leaks for counterplay. And this was done in this game to a large extent. Black was really boxed up into a corner later. It's really a shocking game in many respects, how this bishop pair was totally nullified and Kasparov beaten into a corner. Yes, and I have to say there's a certain responsibility to be very careful with the analysis, but one beauty of the modern engines, they're so powerful, so we're getting to see some amazing variations now, amazing new insights from these games to re-look at them. It's always a privilege to bring these iconic games back and recheck them with new analysis, new ideas. They underline certain principles, and here we see the sheer dynamics of chess, that there isn't this static rule book. It really, things depend on the position. You need advantages which your particular configuration in that particular position can exploit. So this translation of advantages into other things is spectacular here in this case, in my view. I hope you enjoyed it as much as me. Thanks so much.